In the heart of Florence, inside one of Italy's most luxurious five-star hotels, a single act of arrogance would ignite a chain reaction no one saw coming. Malik Davenport, a self-made black CEO worth billions, had come for peace, not power. But when a simple request for room service was denied, dripping with quiet prejudice, Malik's silence turned into something the hotel staff would never forget. Within minutes, the life of that hotel, and the careers of everyone working there, would change forever. Florence in early spring had a kind of beauty that felt almost staged for a film. The air was crisp but gentle, the sunlight catching the terracotta rooftops and ancient stone walls as if painting them with gold. Cobblestone streets carried the hum of footsteps, locals heading to their favorite espresso bars, tourists snapping photographs of the Duomo's majestic dome, and street performers strumming soft melodies on the Ponte Vecchio Bridge. Among them, the grandeur of the city stood Hotel Magnifico, a 17th-century palazzo turned luxury hotel, its facade gleaming ivory against the blue Italian sky. To the casual passerby, it was simply another building steeped in history. But inside, the world changed. Polished marble floors stretched endlessly beneath towering ceilings adorned with frescoes. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the reception hall, and the faint scent of bergamot and white lily lingered in the air, an aroma the hotel prided itself on. The place was a sanctuary for celebrities, royalty, and the business elite. Privacy was as much a luxury here as the silk sheets and Michelin-starred dining. Malik Davenport stepped through the revolving glass doors of the hotel with the calm assurance of a man who had long ago stopped needing to prove himself. At 6'3", with a lean yet athletic build, deep mahogany skin, and sharply tailored charcoal suit, Malik was impossible to overlook. His presence had a quiet authority, no loud gestures, no unnecessary words, yet every movement suggested precision. A pair of dark sunglasses shielded his eyes, though even without them, his expression was difficult to read. He had flown in from New York just hours before, his private jet touching down in Pisa before a chauffeured Maserati brought him the rest of the way to Florence. The trip was meant to be a rare pause in his otherwise relentless schedule. In a week's time, he was set to close one of the largest mergers in European tech history, a move that would cement his company, Davenport Global, as a powerhouse on 3 continents. But for now, he wanted quiet time to think, recalibrate, and absorb the city's Renaissance magic before stepping into the battlefield of corporate negotiations. The hotel's general manager, Giancarlo Rinaldi, had been expecting him. A tall, silver-haired man in his early 50s, Giancarlo had spent decades in hospitality, cultivating an image of unflappable charm. He greeted Malik with a warm, rehearsed smile. "Mr. Davenport, benvenuto. We are honored to have you here," Giancarlo said, offering a slight bow of his head. "Thank you," Malik replied, his tone polite yet distant. He appreciated professionalism, but he had no need for flattery. A bellhop in a crisp uniform wheeled Malik's custom leather luggage toward the gilded elevator while Giancarlo walked beside him, offering a brief overview of the hotel's amenities. Malik listened with half an ear, his mind already cataloging the details that mattered: security cameras positioned discreetly in the lobby corners, the controlled pace of staff movements, the subtle hierarchy in how guests were acknowledged. Years of navigating hostile boardrooms had trained him to read a room within seconds, and the hotel was no exception. His suite, the Medici residence, was on the top floor, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a private terrace with a view of the Arno River. Inside, the decor was a careful blend of modern luxury and historic charm: velvet armchairs in deep emerald, antique oak writing desks, and original 18th century oil paintings framed in gold leaf. Malik took it in with quiet satisfaction. As the bellhop set his luggage by the bedroom door, Malik tipped him generously in crisp euros. The young man's eyes widened, his voice stumbling over a rushed "Grazie, signore." Malik offered only a small nod in response, already loosening his tie and walking toward the terrace. The late afternoon sun spilled warmth over the terracotta rooftops, and for the first time in months, Malik felt a hint of calm settling over him. But beneath that calm, Florence still had its own rhythm and its own flaws. In a city where history was celebrated, certain prejudices also clung like old dust on ancient stone. Malik had learned over years of international travel that even the most refined environments could hide the ugliest forms of bias. And while he had no intention of seeking out trouble, trouble sometimes had a way of finding him. Downstairs in the staff lounge, a quiet conversation was already brewing among a few employees about the new guest in the Medici suite. The whispers were tinged with curiosity, but also an edge of something less innocent. Malik did not know it yet, but among the staff who would soon serve him or refuse to were individuals whose outdated notions of status and race would turn his quiet retreat into a stage for confrontation. For now, though, Malik leaned on the balcony railing, watching the river glisten in the fading light. Somewhere, the bells of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore rang in the distance, their sound deep and resonant. It was a moment of peace, the kind one rarely notices until it's gone. Evening descended over Florence with a gentle inevitability, the city's light shifting from gold to amber before melting into deep indigo. The Arno reflected the glow of lamplight and the blurred movements of couples strolling the riverbanks. From his terrace, Malik could hear the faint strains of a violin drifting up from a busker somewhere below. The melody was slow, melancholic, yet oddly comforting. Inside the suite, Malik moved with quiet efficiency. His jacket hung neatly on the back of a chair, his cufflinks placed with precision on the marble dresser. He was a man who lived by order, not for show, but because discipline had been his compass since the days when he had nothing. Born in the inner city of Detroit to a single mother who worked 2 jobs, Malik's life had been shaped by scarcity. What he lacked in resources, he compensated for in resilience. From selling newspapers as a boy to securing a scholarship at an Ivy League university, every step had been hard-won. And though he was now worth billions, he had never shed the habit of scanning his environment, weighing possibilities, preparing for contingencies. At precisely 7:30 p.m., he decided to have dinner in his suite. Crowded restaurants didn't appeal to him tonight. He preferred to eat while reviewing confidential merger documents notes that could not risk prying eyes. Picking up the room phone, he dialed the number for in-suite dining. The line rang twice before a woman's voice, polite but brisk, answered. "Room service, buonasera. This is Davenport, in the Medici residence," Malik said. "I'd like to place an order for dinner." There was a pause. Not the kind of pause where someone flips a page in a menu binder. This one had a subtle sharpness to it, like the caller was recalibrating their tone. "I'm sorry, signore," she replied. "Room service is unavailable at the moment." Malik frowned slightly. "Unavailable?" he repeated. "Your menu says service is until midnight." "Yes, but for certain rooms, there are restrictions tonight." Her words were halting, the explanation vague. It was a small moment, barely a few sentences, but Malik's instincts caught the ripple beneath the surface. He had encountered this tone before, on trading floors, in luxury boutiques, in private clubs. It was the tone of someone who believed they were subtly enforcing an unspoken boundary, one that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with perception. He didn't push the matter just yet. "Understood," Malik said evenly, and ended the call. Still, the exchange left a faint echo in his thoughts. Restrictions for certain rooms? That was either a logistical failure or something less innocent. Either way, it was noted. Malik's style had never been to react without clarity. He observed, he gathered information, and then only when the full picture was in front of him, he acted. Meanwhile, downstairs in the hotel's kitchen, a different conversation unfolded. Sofia Bianchi, the assistant head waitress, was leaning against the stainless steel counter, her voice lowered as she spoke to Luca Moretti, a waiter with a habit of complaining about wealthy guests. "Why didn't you take his order?" Sofia asked, eyes narrowing. Luca smirked faintly. "Not every guest needs special treatment. He looks like trouble. You know the type." "The type?" she repeated, a trace of disapproval in her tone. "Flashy money, attitude, thinking he can buy the place." "I've seen it before," Luca shrugged. "Besides, the manager won't care. Not for someone like him." Sofia didn't respond immediately. She had worked in hospitality long enough to recognize when lines were being crossed, not just in service, but in judgment. Whether Luca's motives were rooted in prejudice or pure arrogance, it was the kind of thinking that could ruin reputations. Still, she knew better than to pick a fight over it in the middle of a shift. Upstairs, Malik had changed into a navy cashmere sweater, standing once again on the terrace. From here, Florence seemed timeless. It was easy to imagine the Medici, walking these very streets centuries ago, commissioning art and bending politics to their will. Malik had read about them as a young man, fascinated by the idea of influence not just as wealth, but as legacy. He turned back inside, deciding to work through his hunger for now. But the refusal of something as simple as dinner had left an imprint in his mind, and Malik Davenport was not a man who overlooked patterns. This was no longer just a retreat in Florence. The city had given him beauty, but perhaps it was about to give him something else, an opportunity to test just how far his reach extended when provoked. Asterisk. The next morning, Florence awoke under a pale silver sky. The early hours carried a cool stillness, broken only by the soft rumble of delivery carts on the cobblestones and the scent of fresh cornetti drifting from nearby bakeries. Malik rose before dawn, as he always did, his body trained to the rhythms of discipline rather than leisure. After a quick workout in the private fitness space within his suite, he showered, dressed, and descended to the hotel's breakfast hall. Hotel Magnifico's Sala di Colazione was an exercise in understated opulence. Sunlight streamed through tall arched windows, bouncing off cream-colored walls, adorned with framed sketches of Florence in the 1800s. The tables were dressed in crisp white linen, each set with polished silverware and fresh flowers in crystal vases. Soft piano music played from a hidden speaker system, the volume low enough to be a whisper. Malik chose a corner table with a view of the gardens. He noticed immediately that the waiter assigned to his section, Luca Moretti, the same man who had denied his room service the night before, approached his table with an expression that was courteous but distant. There was no warmth, only the bare minimum of professional politeness. "Buongiorno, signore," Luca said, placing the menu down. "Coffee?" "Yes, black. No sugar," Malik replied. When the coffee arrived, it was lukewarm, the crema uneven. A small detail, perhaps meaningless to most guests, but Malik's sharp eye caught it. He said nothing, sipping slowly, his gaze sweeping the room. This was how he operated, taking in the subtleties, measuring what was habit and what was deliberate. From across the hall, Sofia Bianchi was watching the interaction with a quiet unease. She had worked at Hotel Magnifico for 7 years and had seen many kinds of guests, arrogant, kind, indifferent, but Malik Davenport stood apart. He carried himself like someone used to being underestimated, and she sensed that what happened the previous night would not be forgotten. She made a mental note to speak with Giancarlo, the general manager. But Giancarlo himself was busy that morning, seated in his office with Isabella Romano, the hotel's marketing director. Their conversation revolved around an upcoming feature in a prestigious travel magazine, one that would spotlight Hotel Magnifico as the premier luxury destination in Florence. The last thing they needed was any incident that could tarnish that image, though neither of them yet knew that such an incident had already begun to take shape. After breakfast, Malik took a short walk along the Arno, blending with the early tourists. The Ponte Vecchio shimmered in the light, its row of jewelry shops catching the sun like fire. Street vendors called out in Italian, their tables lined with leather goods and watercolor paintings. Malik's mind, however, remained half on business, half on the small but telling moments at the hotel. He had learned that in both corporate negotiations and personal interactions, the smallest details often foreshadowed the largest outcomes. Back at the hotel, the staff lounge buzzed with chatter about the American billionaire in the Medici suite. Some of the younger employees were curious, even impressed. Others, like Luca, were dismissive, their comments laced with thinly veiled disdain. Men like that come and go, Luca muttered to a colleague. They think they own the world just because they can buy a bottle of wine worth my monthly salary. Still, the colleague replied, you might want to be careful. He's probably not someone you want to get on the wrong side of. Luca only smirked, brushing it off. By mid-afternoon, Malik was back in his suite, taking a business call from New York. His voice was calm, his points precise, but there was a certain weight in his words. He was a man who didn't waste time, whether in closing deals or confronting disrespect. And though he hadn't yet acted on the events of the previous night, something in his demeanor suggested he was already planning his move. The city outside continued its rhythm, tourists photographing the Duomo, scooters zipping through narrow lanes, church bells ringing in the distance. Inside Hotel Magnifico, however, a quiet fault line had already formed. No one knew yet how quickly it would crack open, or how thoroughly it would change the balance of power within those marble walls. The late afternoon light in Florence had a peculiar quality, soft yet vibrant, casting long golden streaks through the windows of Hotel Magnifico's top floor. In the Medici residence, Malik sat at the antique oak writing desk, his laptop open, but his gaze distant. The screen displayed columns of figures and draft proposals for the upcoming merger, yet his mind kept drifting back to the previous evening's phone call and the morning's breakfast. He had learned long ago that disrespect rarely existed in isolation. It was usually part of a chain. The refusal of room service, the lukewarm coffee, the clipped tones, they were links in a pattern he recognized. Experience had taught him that the best way to address such things was not with a single reaction, but with a decisive, irreversible move when the right moment came. From his terrace, Malik could see the rooftops glowing in the sinking sun. Beyond the river, the dome of the Duomo seemed to catch fire in the light, a symbol of grandeur and permanence. He thought of the Medici family again, how they built power not just through wealth, but through the art of control. Malik had studied them, not as an admirer of their excesses, but as a strategist interested in how influence could reshape entire systems. A soft knock sounded at his suite door. When he opened it, Sofia Bianchi stood there, holding a silver tray with a small carafe of freshly brewed espresso. "I thought you might like something better than what you had this morning," she said in English, her voice polite but carrying a trace of sincerity. Malik regarded her for a moment, reading her posture, her tone. "Thank you," he said, accepting the tray. "It's on the house," she added. "I heard about last night." He raised an eyebrow slightly, though his expression remained controlled. "And what exactly did you hear?" "That you were told there was no room service available, which is not true." Malik let a short silence stretch between them. In that pause, Sophia sensed he was calculating something, perhaps her motives, perhaps the value of the information she had just given him. Finally, he nodded. "I appreciate your honesty." As she left, Malik set the espresso down on the desk. Without drinking it immediately, her visit confirmed what he already suspected. The denial had not been an accident. Someone on staff had made a deliberate choice to treat him differently. And if there was one thing Malik Davenport never tolerated, it was calculated disrespect. Downstairs, Giancarlo was finishing a call with the hotel's owners in Milan. He walked through the lobby with his usual measured pace, greeting a few guests, and noting with satisfaction how smoothly the evening shift was unfolding. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, there was an unease he couldn't quite place. The lobby itself was a display of grandeur, ornate mirrors framed in gilded wood, velvet armchairs arranged in conversational clusters, and a sweeping staircase that curved upward toward the suites. The smell of jasmine from the floral arrangements mingled with the subtle scent of polished wood. It was a place designed to suggest permanence and grace. But as Giancarlo passed the concierge desk, he caught sight of Luca leaning too casually against the counter, speaking with two other staff members in low tones. Their conversation stopped abruptly when the manager approached. "Everything all right, Moretti?" Giancarlo asked. "Of course, signore," Luca replied smoothly, though the faint smirk on his lips betrayed a kind of private amusement. Giancarlo didn't press the matter, but the moment lingered. In luxury hospitality, as in any enterprise, the smallest disruptions could ripple outward with unpredictable consequences. Back in his suite, Malik finally took a sip of the espresso. It was strong, perfectly balanced, and served at the ideal temperature. He let the flavor settle before setting the cup down. Then, without breaking his calm, he opened his phone, scrolling to a private contacts list. His fingers hovered over a name: Alessandro Vitali, a high-ranking member of an Italian corporate network with ties to hospitality investors. Malik didn't call yet. Timing was everything. But in his mind, the shape of his response was beginning to take form. The next move would not be loud, but it would be final. For now, the city outside still moved in the rhythm of early evening gondola-like boats gliding on the Arno, the chatter of diners spilling from trattorias, the distant toll of church bells. Inside the gilded quiet of Hotel Magnifico, however, a silent countdown had begun. Asterisk night had fully claimed Florence, wrapping the city in a cloak of soft shadows and warm light. The streets below Malik's terrace glimmered with the golden hue of antique street lamps, and the faint sound of laughter floated up from a nearby wine bar. From this height, the city looked peaceful, untouched. But Malik had lived long enough to know that appearances were never the whole story. Inside the Medici residence, the air was still except for the low hum of the suite's central heating. Malik stood at the window, hands in his pockets, his reflection superimposed over the twinkling lights of the Arno. His mind was moving like a chess player studying the board, not rushing, but seeing several moves ahead. He thought about Luca Moretti's face, about the carefully neutral voice on the phone the night before, about Sophia's unprompted honesty. He had built Davenport Global on the principle that respect was non-negotiable. In boardrooms across New York, London, and Tokyo, he had faced men who tried to undermine him, sometimes subtly, sometimes openly. He had learned to respond not with outrage, but with action that left no doubt about his position. The difference here was that this was not business, it was personal. Downstairs, in the staff lounge, the night shift was settling in. Luca lounged in a chair, scrolling through his phone, while two other employees talked quietly over cups of espresso. Sophia sat apart, reviewing the next day's breakfast arrangements, though her thoughts kept drifting upstairs to the guest in the Medici suite. She didn't know Malik Davenport's full story, but she had a feeling that anyone with his presence and composure did not let things slide. Giancarlo, unaware of the exact nature of what had happened, remained in his office, reading over invoices. His managerial instincts told him the hotel was running smoothly, but a faint, almost imperceptible crack had formed in that belief. Near midnight, Malik finally sat at the desk again, closing the documents he had been working on. His phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an assistant in New York confirming details for his upcoming meetings. Malik replied briefly, then opened a blank email draft, his fingers resting on the keys. He typed a single name in the recipient line, Alessandro Vitali. Then he stopped, closing the draft without sending it. Not yet. He preferred to let situations ripen. And right now, the hotel staff didn't yet know that they had already stepped into the early stages of a decision that would erase their careers in a matter of minutes when the time came. Outside, the bells of Santa Maria Novella chimed. The hour. Malik turned off the desk lamp, the suite falling into a warm half-darkness. As he lay back in bed, the city beyond the windows seemed to breathe with quiet anticipation. Florence had been here for centuries, surviving wars, plagues, and political upheaval. It would survive this too. But for the people inside Hotel Magnifico, the coming days would leave a mark they would never forget. The evening in Florence was a gentle masterpiece, an artist's brushstroke of gold and crimson bleeding into the deep blue of night. From the Medici residence suite's high windows, Malik could see the city glowing under the soft light of ancient street lamps. The air carried the distant hum of conversation, the clink of wine glasses from rooftop terraces, and the faint perfume of blooming night jasmine. It was a scene meant for peace. Malik intended to enjoy it before his next week's onslaught of meetings in Milan and Zurich. He loosened the cufflinks on his crisp white shirt, laid his suit jacket neatly over the armchair, and reached for the sleek leather-bound menu on the coffee table. The suite was quiet except for the muffled hum of the city outside. He had decided against dining in the grand restaurant downstairs. Tonight called for solitude and a carefully chosen glass of Brunello di Montalcino. Room service was not a luxury. To Malik it was a ritual. In every city, every high-end hotel, he had come to expect a certain unspoken understanding between guest and staff. Precision, discretion, respect. This wasn't about the food alone. It was about the gesture, the acknowledgement of his presence, the thread of civility that bound the guest's trust to the establishment's reputation. Asterisk, he pressed the in-room service button. After 2 polite chimes, a voice answered, "Buonasera, room service. How may I help you?" The tone was neutral, but Malik could detect that familiar undercurrent, a practiced politeness without warmth. "This is the Medici residence suite," Malik began, keeping his voice smooth. "I'd like to order the truffle risotto, a side of grilled asparagus, and a bottle of your 2015 Brunello di Montalcino." There was a pause. "Sir, may I ask for your room number?" "I'm in the Medici residence," Malik repeated. "Your system should show that." Another pause. "Yes, I see it now. One moment, please." The line went silent except for the faint sound of muffled voices in the background. He thought he caught the word Americano and a short, dismissive laugh before the line clicked back. "I'm sorry, sir," the voice returned, more clipped now. "Room service is unavailable at the moment for your suite." Malik blinked. "Unavailable?" "Yes, sir, the kitchen is closed for this category of request." "This category?" Malik asked, his tone still measured, though the words tightened. "Yes, perhaps you can visit the restaurant directly. We recommend it." The line went dead before he could respond. For a moment, Malik sat still, the receiver in his hand, the weight of the exchange settling over him. His years in business had taught him to recognize the difference between genuine operational hiccups and deliberate obstructions. The language this category of request was not the language of a kitchen closing. It was the language of someone inventing a barrier. And he had heard that muffled laugh. He set the phone down with deliberate care. His mind began to trace possibilities. Was this incompetence? A mistake? Or was it something more personal, something that had shadowed his path more times than he cared to count? Downstairs, at the front desk, Luca Moretti leaned casually against the counter, phone in hand, smirking to his colleague across the marble reception area. He asked for the truffle risotto. Luca said in Italian, his tone laced with derision. "In the suite, at this hour. Like the kitchen is just waiting for him." Sofia Bianchi, passing by with a folder of guest requests, caught the words. She stopped, her brow knitting. And you told him no? She asked, her voice low but edged. The kitchen is busy. Luca replied with a shrug that suggested it wasn't entirely true. Besides, he can eat downstairs if it's that important. Sophia glanced toward the phone at the desk, her lips pressing into a thin line. She had served Malik earlier that afternoon, arranging a private tour of the Uffizi for him with minimal fuss. He had been polite, precise, and respectful, a guest who knew exactly what he wanted and expressed it without arrogance. She knew, without doubt, that the refusal he had just received was not about kitchen capacity. Luca, she said quietly, you're walking a dangerous line. The Medici residence is our most exclusive suite. Guests there don't just visit the restaurant when they've asked for room service. Luca smiled without warmth. Some guests think too highly of themselves. A little grounding doesn't hurt. Sophia inhaled, ready to push back, but she stopped. Giancarlo Benedetti had just stepped out from the manager's office, his silver hair catching the lobby's warm light. He scanned the reception area with the calm pride of a man convinced his ship sailed without leaks. Sophia weighed her choice: confront Luca here, risk a scene, or stay silent and watch events unfold. She chose silence, but her eyes followed Luca, memorizing the small curve of his smirk. Upstairs, Malik's gaze had shifted from the city lights to his reflection in the dark glass of the window. His posture was still calm, but the stillness was deceptive. He had learned long ago that respect, once denied, rarely returned on its own. And in his world, disrespect was not a matter for quiet tolerance. It was a signal. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from an associate in Milan reminded him of tomorrow's meeting. He ignored it for now. Instead, he picked up the hotel's direct line, not room service this time, but the main reception. Front desk, buonasera, came the voice. It was not Luca this time, but a younger clerk. This is Malik Davenport in the Medici residence suite, he said, his voice even. Kindly connect me with your general manager. The clerk hesitated, likely unaccustomed to such direct requests at this hour. Of course, sir. One moment. Malik waited. His mind was not yet at the stage of deciding action, but the early contours of a decision were beginning to form slowly, precisely, like a chess player arranging the board before the first move. A soft click sounded on the line before a measured, almost theatrical voice came through. This is Giancarlo Benedetti, general manager. How may I assist you this evening, Mr. Davenport? The smoothness of his tone was deliberate, as if poured from a decanter, polished, practiced, and meant to reassure. Malik recognized it instantly. It was the voice of a man used to extinguishing small fires before they reached the lobby. Mr. Benedetti, Malik said evenly, I attempted to place a room service order a few minutes ago. I was informed that my suite is not eligible for service at this time. I'd like to understand why. There was the faintest pause, less than a heartbeat, but Malik caught it. I am terribly sorry for the inconvenience, Giancarlo began. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding with our kitchen's current capacity. We are, unfortunately, experiencing logistical limitations this evening. Logistical limitations, Malik repeated, that prevent the kitchen from sending a plate of risotto and a bottle of wine to your most exclusive suite? Giancarlo's tone did not falter. Regrettably, yes. Our dining room is quite full, and our chef is committed to the restaurant's service flow. Malik let a beat pass. Then I trust the kitchen will be sending the same message to every guest who requests in-room dining. Tonight? Of course, sir, Giancarlo replied, the reassurance almost too quick. We value all our guests equally. It was the wrong thing to say. Malik didn't miss the tell in the words equally, an unnecessary emphasis that rang hollow. Very well, Malik said at last. Thank you for clarifying. Again, my apologies, Giancarlo added, eager to close the call. We would be delighted to host you in our restaurant. I will personally ensure you are given our finest table. Malik hung up without promising anything. Downstairs, in the shadow of the reception desk, Giancarlo lowered the phone slowly, his eyes narrowing at Luca, who lounged a few steps away. "Did you take Mr. Davenport's call earlier?" Giancarlo asked in Italian, his tone deceptively mild. Luca straightened. "Yes, I told him the kitchen is busy." "That's not the script," Giancarlo replied. "The script is that the kitchen is temporarily delayed. We never tell a guest their suite is ineligible." Luca's shrug was small but insolent. "He'll live. These Americans—" He stopped when Giancarlo's eyes sharpened. "Mind your tongue," the manager said quietly. "Do you know who he is?" "A guest in the most expensive suite," Luca said, half smirking again. Giancarlo leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "He's not just a guest. He's the CEO of Davenport Global. Do you have any idea how many properties his company owns?" Luca's smirk faltered, but only slightly. "Still, he's just enough," Giancarlo cut in. "You will say nothing further to him unless I instruct you. And if this is a case of personal opinion affecting professional duty, I will find out." Upstairs, Malik sat back in the armchair, eyes fixed on the dark expanse beyond the glass. The Duomo's dome glowed in the distance, a beacon over centuries of commerce, politics, and betrayal. Florence was a city that understood quiet power plays centuries ago in the court of the Medici, and still now in its polished hotels. He could have insisted, demanded service immediately, even threatened a review or a call to his travel network. But Malik's instincts told him to wait. The true measure of people, he had learned, was not in how they responded to pressure in the moment, but in the ripples that followed. His laptop rested open on the side table, an email from his Milan associate, blinking at the top of the inbox. Instead of answering it, he opened a new document and began to type a few notes not about business, but about the evening's events. Names, times, phrases. He wrote them like a ledger entry. If this was incompetence, it would reveal itself soon enough. But if it was something else, something rooted in prejudice or personal bias, then Malik knew from experience that such behavior never stayed contained to one incident. He wasn't angry yet, but there was a certain stillness to him now, the kind that had in boardrooms across the world preceded some of his most decisive moves. Meanwhile, Sophia lingered in the staff hallway, pretending to review a service schedule while listening to murmurs from the front desk. Luca had gone to the back office, and Giancarlo was on the phone again, speaking in a tone she recognized as damage control. She felt the knot in her stomach tighten. It wasn't the first time she had seen Luca's casual disrespect toward certain guests, but it was the first time the target was someone with clear influence. And influence in Florence's luxury circuit was not something you gambled with lightly. She turned toward the service elevator, a thought forming in her mind. If the kitchen wouldn't send food up, perhaps she could. But doing so without orders would put her directly in the line of fire with Giancarlo. As the elevator doors closed, she found herself wondering whether Malik Davenport was the kind of man who would let such an incident pass, or the kind who, given the right moment, would make the entire building remember it. The service elevator rattled softly as it ascended, its brass fixtures reflecting the dim overhead light. Sophia held a small tray balanced in one hand, a silver-domed plate, a basket of fresh bread, and a bottle of Brunello di Montalcino with a single crystal glass. She had no official order, no authorization, and certainly no clearance from Giancarlo. But the more she thought about the scene downstairs, the more she knew she couldn't stand by. She had seen that look in Luca's eyes before, the one that measured people not by their worth, but by their appearance. Her father's voice came to her as the elevator jolted to a stop. "Respect is not given by the uniform you wear, Sophia. It's given by the way you treat the people who don't wear one." The corridor outside Malik Davenport's suite was silent, lined with thick carpets that muffled her steps. She knocked softly 3 times, The door opened a fraction, and Malik appeared, still in the tailored shirt from earlier, sleeves rolled to his forearms. His eyes flicked from the tray to her face. "Mr. Davenport," she began, keeping her tone formal but warm, "I took the liberty of bringing you something from the dining room. It's not on the books, but—" Malik stepped aside without a word, motioning her in. She crossed the threshold, her movements precise, as if each one had been rehearsed in 100 other suites for 100 other guests. "I shouldn't be doing this," Sophia admitted, placing the tray on the low table by the window. "But I didn't think the circumstances downstairs reflected the standards of our hotel." Malik studied her for a moment, saying nothing. Then he asked, "You're not here on orders from management, are you?" "No," she said quietly, "and I may get into trouble for it." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not quite amusement, more like recognition. "You have a name, miss." "Bianchi. Sophia Bianchi, senior concierge." He nodded, as if committing it to memory. "I appreciate the gesture, Miss Bianchi. But I suspect you didn't come up here just to deliver food." Her eyes flickered to the floor for a moment, before meeting his again. "I came because what happened at the desk wasn't a mistake. At least not the kind that comes from being busy." Malik leaned back slightly in his chair, letting her words hang in the air. "Go on," Sophia hesitated, weighing her next move. Speaking openly about a colleague, especially to a guest, was against every line in the employee handbook. But Malik's presence had a gravity to it, like the quiet pull of a tide. "It's not my place to accuse anyone," she said carefully. "But I've noticed certain patterns. Some guests are given the full extent of our service. Others, for reasons I don't always understand, are not." Malik didn't press her. Instead, he poured a glass of wine and slid it across the table toward her, a silent acknowledgement of the risk she was taking. She didn't drink, but the gesture registered. "You've given me more than a meal, Miss Bianchi," he said. "You've given me context." Downstairs, Luca leaned against the counter at the back office, idly flipping through a hotel ledger while Giancarlo spoke to the kitchen over the phone. "She's been gone a while," Luca remarked. Giancarlo didn't look up. "Who?" "The concierge, Sophia, said she was going to check on a guest request." Something in Giancarlo's expression shifted, just slightly. He set down the phone. "Which guest?" Luca's smirk returned. "Guess," Giancarlo exhaled slowly. "Dio mio." He straightened his jacket. "If she's interfering, it will be her problem to explain." Upstairs, the air between Malik and Sophia had shifted. She stood by the door now, ready to leave, but Malik's voice stopped her. "You said it's not your place to accuse anyone. But what if someone asked you to simply tell the truth?" Sophia met his gaze, her professional mask firmly back in place. "Then I'd say the truth is often less about rules and more about courage." He watched her go, the door closing with a soft click. Outside, the city hummed faintly through the glass. Malik poured himself another glass of wine, his mind already moving, calculating, filing details, and arranging possibilities like chess pieces. It wasn't yet the moment to make his move. But the board was set, and the first pieces were already in play. Giancarlo found Sophia in the narrow hallway behind the concierge desk, returning a stack of guest itineraries to the filing cabinet. Her posture was perfect, shoulders straight, chin level, but there was no mistaking the slight quickness in her movements. "Signorina Bianchi," he said smoothly, as though nothing in the world could disturb his composure. "I understand. You've been proactive this evening." Sophia closed the drawer and turned, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I was assisting a guest. Were you?" His voice had the warmth of an expensive brandy poured over ice, inviting on the surface, but designed to numb. "Or were you bypassing protocol to address a matter that was already under my direct supervision?" Mr. Davenport was denied service, she replied evenly. I believe the situation required immediate correction. Giancarlo stepped closer, lowering his voice. This hotel operates on structure, not impulse. You may think you were helping, but you've set a precedent one where any staff member can override management's decisions based on personal judgment. And what precedent is set, she countered quietly, when we choose not to serve a guest because of something other than policy. For a moment, the only sound between them was the faint hum of the hallway lights. You're a capable concierge, Sofia, Giancarlo said at last. Don't let misplaced sentiment cloud your professionalism. Understood, sir, she said. Though her eyes didn't soften across the lobby, Malik sat in an upholstered armchair by the bar, his laptop closed, a single espresso cooling in front of him. He had positioned himself where he could see both the reception desk and the elevator bank. From here, he had a clear view of interactions, postures, glances, the little hierarchies that played out in the polished theater of luxury hospitality. He saw Giancarlo step out from the staff corridor, his expression perfectly neutral, and Sofia emerge moments later, her stride purposeful but not hurried. There was tension there. Just beneath the surface. Malik wasn't a man who believed in coincidences. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 11 p.m. The restaurant would soon slow down, and with it, the night's operational mask would start to slip. That was when true behavior revealed itself, when staff thought no one important was watching. Malik reached for his phone, opening a secure messaging app. He typed a short note to a contact in Milan. Need quiet background on Hotel Magnifico. Staff, particularly Giancarlo Benedetti and front desk clerk named Luca. Discretion critical. He sent it and sipped his espresso, letting the bitter edge sit on his tongue. In the staff lounge, Luca was already complaining to a junior clerk. She thinks she's above the rules, running food upstairs like she owns the place. You mean Sofia? The clerk asked cautiously. Who else? She's lucky Giancarlo didn't fire her on the spot. And that guy, Luca shook his head. You can tell he's trouble. Certain people always are. He didn't notice that the night porter Massimo was lingering in the doorway. Massimo had worked in hotels long enough to know when to stay silent and when a story might have legs. By the time Malik returned to his suite, the city outside had gone quiet, the streets below glistening from a light rain. He set his jacket over the chair and walked to the window, the reflection of the Duomo's dome shimmering faintly in the glass. He thought about Sofia's words, about the pause in Giancarlo's voice, about Luca's barely veiled disdain. In business, patterns were often more revealing than single incidents. And Malik was starting to see the outline of one forming here. This wasn't about risotto. It wasn't even about room service. It was about something older, uglier, and far more expensive for the hotel than they realized. And if they thought they could contain it to a single night, they were about to find out how wrong they were. Morning in Florence carried with it the smell of wet stone and espresso drifting from the street cafes. Sunlight poured across the terracotta rooftops, illuminating the soaked cobblestones as if the night's rain had been a quiet blessing. But inside the Hotel Magnifico, the atmosphere was far from serene. Malik stood at his window in a fresh navy suit, the crisp white shirt beneath unwrinkled as though it had been pressed only moments ago. He wasn't a man who lingered over morning rituals. He operated with intention from the moment he opened his eyes. And today, his intention was clear. He glanced at the notes he'd compiled during the night, flipping through pages filled with precise handwriting. Every line was a bullet in a chamber, each observation waiting for the right moment to be fired. He didn't see this as revenge. To him, this was simply the correction of a flawed system. The Magnifico had revealed its cracks, and he was prepared to apply pressure until the entire facade crumbled. At 8:05 a.m., he descended to the lobby. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne, the kind of curated scent that told guests they were somewhere exclusive. Sophia was at her station, already engaged with a couple from Canada who were asking about train schedules to Rome. She caught Malik's eye briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement, but kept her professional smile in place as she handed the guests a printed timetable. Giancarlo emerged from his office moments later, wearing a three-piece charcoal suit with a silver tie pin. His expression was one of composed readiness, but Malik noticed the faint shadow of fatigue around his eyes. The man had likely been briefed on Malik's room service experience, and Malik suspected he had spent part of the morning deciding how best to contain matter. Mr. Davenport, Giancarlo greeted with a smooth, calculated warmth. I trust your evening improved after our small misunderstanding? Malik smiled faintly, the kind of smile that offered nothing of his real thoughts. The night was enlightening. They stood across from each other like chess players contemplating the opening move. Giancarlo didn't press the conversation further, but Malik could feel the subtle probing in his gaze. After breakfast taken, alone at a corner table where he could observe the dining room flow, Malik began making his calls. Not the public kind, not the kind that left an obvious trail. These were quiet, deliberate conversations with people whose influence stretched into Florence's hospitality circles. He inquired casually about the Magnifico's reputation, about Giancarlo's management style, about Luca Rossi's customer relations. The responses were polite but careful, tinged with hesitation. By late morning, Malik had assembled a clearer picture. The Magnifico was a jewel of the city, but one that had begun to tarnish. Whispers of selective service, quiet settlements for offended guests, staff turnover that was higher than the industry average. None of it had made the papers, but Malik knew the value of information that hadn't yet reached public ears. It was leverage, pure and potent. At 11:30, Malik requested a private meeting with the hotel's owner. Not through Giancarlo directly. He had the owner's assistant on the line within minutes, his voice polite, but carrying a weight that suggested the request was not optional. By noon, the meeting was set for the next day in a private suite. Malik knew that skipping the chain of command would rattle Giancarlo, and that was precisely the point. Meanwhile, Sophia found herself in a subtle crossfire. Giancarlo had asked her, with an edge of formality, to submit a written account of the events surrounding Malik's denied room service. She knew that her honesty could put her directly at odds with her boss, but lying would leave her complicit in something she couldn't respect. That afternoon, as she typed up her account in the quiet of the back office, she paused more than once, replaying the moments in her head, weighing each word carefully. Malik had been calm, respectful, direct. She hadn't heard him raise his voice or make unreasonable demands. The refusal had come from Luca, whose tone had been dismissive. From the outset, when she delivered the report to Giancarlo, his eyes scanned it quickly. She couldn't read whether he was pleased or displeased, only that he folded the paper neatly and set it aside without comment. By evening, word had begun to circulate among the staff that Malik was someone important, though no one seemed certain in what way. The guesses ranged from an investor to a government official to a celebrity traveling under the radar. Luca dismissed them all with a smirk. He's just a guest who thinks he's special. Let him try to pull something, it won't stick. But Malik wasn't pulling anything. He was laying the foundation. That night, he sat in the same upholstered armchair by the bar where he'd observed the lobby before. But this time, he wasn't only watching. He was listening to the rhythms of the staff, to the interactions with guests, to the way the Magnifico's elegance faltered in the small human cracks between transactions. Tomorrow, the first real move would be made. And when it happened, it wouldn't be a ripple. It would be a tide. Asterisk the next morning unfolded with the quiet order that the Hotel Magnifico prided itself on, but beneath that polished surface, threads were already beginning to loosen. Malik descended from his suite just after 8, looking every bit the image of a high-level executive. Navy silk tie, gold cufflinks, polished black Oxfords that caught the morning light. He moved with an ease that was neither hurried nor slow, the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. At the front desk, Luca stood behind the marble counter, flipping through the reservation ledger without looking up. Malik paused a moment too long. "Good morning, Mr. Davenport," Luca said finally, the words flat and practiced. "Morning," Malik replied, his tone neutral but laced with an undercurrent that made Luca glance up. "I'll need a list of your premium suite availability for the next 3 months. Include occupancy rates and current VIP guest bookings." Luca frowned. "That's not typically something we share with guests." Malik's expression didn't change. "I'm aware of what's typical. I'm requesting it anyway." Luca hesitated, then, perhaps calculating that refusal might be more trouble than compliance, gave a curt nod. "I'll speak to the manager." "Do that," Malik said evenly, before walking toward the breakfast lounge. The request alone was enough to set ripples moving through the morning routine. By the time Malik finished his coffee, Giancarlo had approached, his expression composed but his stride brisk. "I understand you've requested internal occupancy data," Giancarlo said, his voice pitched low enough to avoid drawing attention. "I have," Malik said, setting his cup down gently. "I find it helps me assess opportunities." Giancarlo's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Opportunities?" "For improvement," Malik said smoothly. "I'll be speaking with Signora Bellini tomorrow about some ideas. I imagine you'll want to be included." The mention of the hotel's owner's name was deliberate, a bead of mercury dropped into still water. Giancarlo recovered quickly, but Malik didn't miss the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth. After breakfast, Malik spent 2 hours in the lounge, laptop open, speaking on and off in quiet tones to contacts across 3 time zones. He didn't need to raise his voice. The weight of his words carried in the pauses, in the scribbled notes he left in his leather-bound journal, in the subtle nods to himself as pieces of information aligned. By midday, Sofia approached with a discreet note and invitation from Signora Bellini to meet privately at her villa that evening, a full day earlier than originally scheduled. Malik read it, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Sofia," he said. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment. "I hope whatever you're planning won't hurt the wrong people." Malik's gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "The wrong people will be fine." The villa meeting was set for 7 p.m., which gave Malik the afternoon to tighten the net. He began by requesting a walkthrough of the hotel's restricted service areas, presenting it to Giancarlo as a curiosity about the behind-the-scenes craftsmanship that kept the Magnifico running. Reluctantly, Giancarlo assigned a junior staff member to accompany him. Malik took note of everything: the uneven stock of luxury toiletries, the under-trained kitchen assistants struggling with the day's orders, the staff corridor where chipped paint and poor lighting clashed with the front-of-house opulence. These were the gaps, the tiny fractures invisible to guests but glaring to someone who understood the anatomy of a hospitality empire. At 5:30 p.m., Malik returned to his suite, changed into a tailored charcoal suit, and reviewed his prepared talking points. He didn't plan to demand anything from Signora Bellini. He intended to offer her something: a vision of the Magnifico elevated, streamlined, and unshakably prestigious. But for that vision to be compelling, it would have to come with a cost. She couldn't ignore the knowledge that keeping her current leadership would make that vision impossible. As the sun set over Florence, casting the city in gold and amber, Malik left the Magnifico and stepped into the waiting black sedan that would take him to the Bellini villa. His reflection in the tinted window was calm, almost serene, but beneath that stillness, every move was calculated. Tonight was not about confrontation, it was about planting the seed. By the time it bloomed, the roots would be too deep for anyone to pull out. The Bellini villa sat on the outskirts of Florence, nestled among rolling vineyards and olive groves that had been in the family for generations. Its stone walls glowed warm in the fading light, the kind of golden hue that seemed born from centuries of Tuscan sunsets. As the black sedan approached, wrought iron gates swung open silently, revealing a cobblestone drive lined with cypress trees that whispered in the evening breeze. Malik stepped out into the scent of rosemary and lavender. Air here was quieter than the city, a silence that wasn't empty, but full, like a held breath. The front doors, carved with intricate floral patterns, opened before he reached them. A middle-aged housekeeper greeted him with a polite bow of the head. "Senor Davenport, please follow me. The Senora is expecting you." Inside the villa was a living museum. Oil paintings of Bellini ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. The marble floors shone with the reflection of crystal chandeliers. The housekeeper led him through a series of high-ceilinged rooms until they reached a sunlit conservatory overlooking the vineyards. Signora Bellini was already there. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. A string of pearls rested at her collarbone, but her most striking feature was her gaze sharp, appraising, the eyes of a woman who had negotiated her way through decades of business, politics, and social maneuvering without ever losing ground. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice low but resonant. "Welcome." Malik inclined his head slightly. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I don't often move my schedule," she replied, motioning for him to sit across from her. At a table set with crystal glasses and a bottle of Brunello di Montalcino. "But I understand you are not an ordinary guest." The faintest hint of a smile touched Malik's lips. "I like to think of myself as an observer who happens to act when necessary." She poured the wine herself, a subtle statement that she was in control of this meeting. "Then observe for me, Mr. Davenport. What do you see in my hotel?" Malik leaned back slightly, not rushing his answer. "I see excellence, and I see entropy. The Magnifico has a reputation worth protecting, but reputations don't erode suddenly. They chip away one poor interaction, one subtle act of exclusion, one guest who leaves feeling they were valued less than the others. And over time, those chips accumulate until the shine is gone." Her fingers tipped once against the glass. "You speak like someone who's seen this before." "I've bought hotels like yours," Malik said simply. "Some I've saved, some I've dismantled and rebuilt. In each case, the turning point came when the owner realized that loyalty to the wrong people is more dangerous than loyalty to the wrong idea." There was a pause long enough for the weight of his words to settle. "And you believe," she said slowly, "that I am loyal to the wrong people?" Malik didn't flinch. "I believe you have a manager who protects the image of the Magnifico, but not its soul." Bellini studied him for several moments, her expression unreadable. Outside, the last light of day slid below the horizon, bathing the conservatory in twilight. "You've given me your assessment," she said finally. "But assessments are easy, solutions are hard. What would you do if you were me?" Malik's answer was quiet, deliberate. "I would remove anyone who cannot embody the standards you believe the Magnifico represents. Not gradually, not after another scandal, now." For a long time, she said nothing. Then, she took a slow sip of wine, her gaze never leaving his. "I will think about what you've said, Mr. Davenport. In the meantime, enjoy your stay. The staff will be attentive to your needs." Malik rose, understanding the conversation was over for tonight. He had not come for a promise, only to plant the thought. And he could tell by the slight tension in her jaw that the thought had taken root. As he left the villa, the cypress trees stood dark against the night sky, and Malik allowed himself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. The seed was planted. Now all it needed was the right weather to grow, and Malik was very good at making storms. The following morning, Malik moved through the Magnifico with a deliberate calm that belied the gears turning in his mind. He knew that to push Signora Bellini toward action, she needed more than suspicion, she needed evidence. And Malik was very good at producing the kind of evidence that could not be ignored. He began with observation. Not the casual kind that any guest might make, but the quiet, predatory kind that noticed patterns others dismissed. At breakfast, he lingered longer than usual in the lounge, his eyes drifting not to the food, but to the staff's movements. The new server, a nervous young man named Pietro, dropped a teaspoon with a sharp clang. Luca, standing at the espresso counter, didn't step in to help. He simply shook his head and muttered something Malik caught from across the room. Impara a stare al tu posto. Learn to stay in your place. Malik noted it without reacting. By mid-morning, he had settled himself in the business center with his laptop, but his real focus wasn't on his screen, it was on the hallway beyond. Twice, he saw guests approach the front desk with small complaints, and twice, Giancarlo's voice carried back, smooth, placating, but never apologetic. Malik knew the type, managing appearances rather than resolving problems. After lunch, Malik executed the next phase, controlled disruption. He requested a meeting room for a confidential call and intentionally left a file folder open on the desk. Its contents visible enough to catch curiosity, a stack of mock financial documents, complete with the Magnifico's name and speculative profit-loss projections. It wasn't real, but it was convincing enough to spark whispers. Sure enough, within an hour, Sophia appeared at the door. She glanced at the papers, then at him. "You're making people nervous." "Good," Malik replied without looking up. "Nervous people make mistakes. Mistakes reveal truths." That afternoon, Malik arranged for a small courier delivery too. Black leather portfolios addressed to him. The first contained legitimate business contracts for an unrelated project. The second was a carefully curated dossier of hospitality industry metrics, printed with discreet red annotations. He made sure the second was opened in view of a junior concierge, knowing word would travel. By evening, he had what he needed. Tension. Staff members moved with a slight edge. Conversation stopped abruptly when he passed, and Giancarlo began appearing in unexpected places, watching Malik with forced politeness. But Malik wasn't finished. In the lounge before dinner, he struck up a conversation with a visiting couple from New York, subtly steering it toward their experience with the hotel. He didn't record it, but he didn't need to. Their frustration with a delayed room service order, their sense that certain guests received different treatment, was exactly the kind of language that would sound damning if repeated, and Malik planned to repeat it to the right ears, at the right time. That night, back in his suite, Malik stood at the window overlooking Florence. The city lights stretched to the horizon, the Arno glinting like a dark ribbon under the street lamps. He sipped a glass of Barolo, letting the weight of the day settle. He had not confronted anyone directly. He hadn't accused. He hadn't demanded. But the atmosphere inside the Magnifico was changing, shifting from complacency to unease, from quiet hierarchy to something brittle and volatile. Tomorrow he would give that brittleness a final push. And when it cracked, Signora Bellini would have her evidence. The morning began with rain, a soft Tuscan drizzle that coated the streets in a reflective sheen. Malik welcomed it. Rain had a way of amplifying discomfort, making small irritations sharper, tempers shorter. It was the perfect weather for what he intended. By breakfast, the dining hall was unusually crowded, guests choosing to linger indoors rather than venture out into the damp streets. Malik selected a table near the center, where his presence couldn't be ignored. He ordered an espresso, then a second, then a third, noting with clinical precision the way the staff's rhythm faltered under the strain of the morning rush. At 9:17 a.m., the moment he'd been waiting for arrived. A guest, a well-dressed middle-aged woman in a cream coat, approached the Mater D with a polite but firm complaint. Her room service order had been incomplete. And when she'd called to correct it, she'd been placed on hold for 20 minutes. The Mater D promised to resolve it immediately. Malik leaned back, watching. Minutes later, Luca emerged from the kitchen, carrying the missing breakfast items himself. But instead of offering an apology, he delivered the plate with a clipped, "Here." The woman's face stiffened, her cheeks flushing. Malik could see it, the tiny fracture in her perception of the Magnifico's perfection. He rose from his seat and approached her table. "Is everything all right, Signora?" She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. It's fine." Malik smiled faintly. "It's not fine, may I?" He gestured to the empty chair across from her. She nodded. Within minutes, she was explaining everything, how she had chosen the Magnifico for its reputation, how she felt diminished by the staff's tone, how she wondered if her accent had marked her as less important. Malik listened attentively, offering nothing but the occasional nod. By the time he excused himself, 2 nearby tables had overheard enough to exchange knowing glances. The seed was spreading, but Malik wasn't done. At 11:45 a.m., he requested a private lunch meeting in one of the smaller salons, inviting the New York couple he'd spoken to the night before. When they arrived, he ensured the doors remained slightly ajar. The conversation about service disparities, about the sense that certain guests received preferential treatment, was loud enough to carry into the corridor, where junior staff bustled past. At 1:02 p.m., Malik staged the final spark. He called the front desk, requesting that a personal package be delivered to his suite immediately. It was urgent, he said, containing sensitive business materials. Then he waited, and waited. By 1:45, no one had arrived. Malik descended to the lobby, his expression neutral, but his voice pitched just loud enough for other guests to hear. "I'm afraid I'll need to speak directly to Signora Bellini about this," he said to Giancarlo, who paled almost imperceptibly. That single line delivered in the open was enough. Within an hour, the whispers were everywhere. The American businessman was unhappy. He was speaking to the owner. Something was wrong. By evening, the air inside the Magnifico was electric. Staff avoided lingering in conversation. The usual polished smiles were tighter, the movements sharper. And at dinner, Malik noticed something significant. Signora Bellini herself had arrived, walking the dining hall with quiet purpose, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. When their gazes met, Malik offered the faintest inclination of his head. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. The storm was here. Tomorrow, it would break. Morning in Florence carried a deceptive calm, the rain finally lifting to reveal a city washed clean, its terracotta rooftops glistening in the hesitant sunlight. But inside the Magnifico Hotel, the air was anything but serene. Malik stepped from the elevator at exactly 8 o'clock, dressed in a perfectly cut black suit, the deep burgundy of his pocket square a subtle but deliberate contrast, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. Guests lingering in the lobby turned instinctively to watch him pass, their curiosity sharpened by the rumors that had rippled through the corridors since his arrival. The staff, too, were hyper-aware, movements slightly stiffer, voices pitched lower because Malik's presence had become the gravitational center of the hotel. Giancarlo, stationed behind the front desk like a nervous gatekeeper, offered a strained "Buongiorno, Signor Johnson," that Malik answered with a nod so slight it could have been missed entirely. Without a word, Malik strode past him toward the main corridor, his path intentionally taking him through the dining hall, where the breakfast service was at its peak. The clink of porcelain and the low murmur of conversation filled the air. But as he passed table after table, heads turned, forks paused mid-air, and whispers began to trail in his wake. He reached the far end of the room where a small group of guests, including the cream-coated woman from the day before, were seated together, their expressions eager. Malik stopped just long enough to greet them warmly, leaning in to exchange A few quiet words that, while inaudible to most, carried enough weight in his posture and tone to spark another ripple of speculation. Then, as though on cue, Signora Bellini herself entered from the opposite side of the room. Dressed in an immaculately tailored navy dress, her silver-streaked hair swept back with precise elegance, she moved with the authority of someone who understood that every eye in the room followed her. Their gazes locked across the expanse of polished tile, his steady and unreadable, hers sharp and assessing. The silence between them was charged, though not hostile. It was the pause before a decisive move in a game neither was willing to lose. She crossed the room with unhurried steps, stopping directly before him, her voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Senior Johnson, I believe it is time we talked." Malik inclined his head slightly. "I couldn't agree more." She gestured toward a private salon just off the dining hall, and together they entered, the heavy door closing behind them with a muted click that left the rest of the room buzzing. Inside, the space was intimate but grand gold-trimmed mirrors, high-backed chairs upholstered in deep green velvet, and a long mahogany table set for no one. They sat across from each other, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Malik rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, while Bellini folded her arms lightly, her eyes never leaving his. "You have unsettled my staff," she began, her tone controlled but carrying the faintest edge of accusation. Malik smiled faintly. "I believe your staff unsettled themselves. I simply gave them the opportunity to show me who they are." She narrowed her eyes, the first crack in her composed facade. "And who do you think they are?" Malik leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Inconsistent, selective in their hospitality. Quick to serve those they recognize, slow to those they don't. And sometimes," he let the pause stretch, "sometimes they forget that the person in front of them might have more influence than they can imagine." Bellini's gaze sharpened, as though testing his meaning. "So this is about influence?" Malik shook his head. "This is about principle. I came here prepared to enjoy the best Florence had to offer. Instead, I found a staff willing to dismiss a guest's request because he didn't fit their expectation of importance. That is not the Magnifico I've heard about, and it's not the one you want to run." Bellini's expression was unreadable, but Malik could see the calculation in her eyes. She understood now that this was not a simple complaint to be smoothed over with an apology or a complimentary bottle of wine. This was a man making a point, and he had the attention of her guests. "What exactly do you want, Senior Johnson?" she asked finally. Malik sat back, letting the silence work for him. "I want change. And if change means replacing those who cannot rise to the standard your name demands, then so be it." The weight of the words settled between them, heavy and irreversible. Bellini's lips pressed into a thin line, and after a moment she stood. "Stay in the salon," she said quietly, and left without another word. Malik remained seated, his posture calm but his mind calculating the unfolding scene beyond the door. Through the faint hum of the hotel, he could hear her voice, firm, precise, calling names, summoning the staff one by one. When the door finally opened again, the transformation was instantaneous. Bellini entered, followed by a cluster of employees, their expressions ranging from defiant to stunned. Giancarlo was among them, his complexion pale, his hands clasped behind his back. Bellini stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding the room. "This morning," she began, "we address a matter of honor. Our guest, Senior Johnson, has experienced treatment beneath our standard. This is unacceptable." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over them. "Effective immediately, the following individuals are relieved of their duties." The names came, one after another, Giancarlo's among the first. Each met with a murmur of shock from the assembled group. Malik watched without flinching, his expression neither gloating nor sympathetic. It was the cold precision of a man seeing a strategy through to its end. When the last name was read, Bellini dismissed the group, and they filed out in silence, the echo of their footsteps fading down the marble corridor. The room was suddenly quiet again, save for the soft ticking of a gilded clock on the wall. Bellini turned back to Malik. "You've made your point," she said. Malik met her gaze evenly. "It wasn't about making a point. It was about protecting your legacy." For a moment, her expression softened just a fraction before she straightened once more. "Enjoy your stay, Senior Johnson. I trust it will be satisfactory from now on." She left the salon, and Malik remained seated for a long moment, the faint sound of Florence stirring beyond the windows. Outside, the city glowed under the morning light, but inside the Magnifico, the air had shifted completely. The balance of power was no longer where it had been. Malik had not only reclaimed his dignity, he had reshaped the very order of the hotel. The rain that had haunted Florence for days had given way to a fragile blue sky, and the Magnifico Hotel, despite the quiet storm it had endured that morning, resumed its outward elegance as if nothing had happened. Yet inside, the atmosphere was undeniably different. The usual smooth ballet of staff movements was now replaced by a subdued, careful rhythm, new faces appearing where familiar ones had stood, and those who remained moving with a sharpened attentiveness, as though each action might be measured against an invisible scale. Malik Johnson noticed it the moment he stepped out of the salon and into the main corridor. Conversations among guests hushed when he passed, not out of suspicion now, but curiosity and a subtle trace of respect. His reputation had spread, though no one knew the full details. The essence of the story had already been distilled into a single, potent truth. A man of influence had come to the Magnifico, had been wronged, and had not only defended his dignity, but reshaped the hotel itself. Malik walked toward the terrace lounge, pausing to glance through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Arno River. Sunlight caught the surface in a dazzling shimmer, and beyond, the city's ochre-walled buildings seemed to lean in toward the water, as if Florence itself were listening. He found a seat at a secluded corner table and ordered an espresso from a young server who approached with the air of someone who understood exactly who he's serving. There was no hesitation, no subtle condescension, just precise politeness and genuine warmth. The espresso arrived on a silver tray, the crema flawless, accompanied by a delicate almond biscotti. Malik smiled faintly to himself. It wasn't about the coffee, but about the shift in tone. Across the terrace, a few guests thoughtfully studied him, some curious, others openly admiring. One middle-aged couple from London eventually gathered the courage to approach, offering thanks for what they had heard he had done, speaking of their own frustrations with similar experiences in other places. Malik listened with patience, then responded with a gracious nod and a few words about self-respect, and the standards one should never compromise. The conversation left them smiling, and Malik returned to his coffee, his thoughts drifting not just to the events of the past 48 hours, but to the long thread of experiences that had taught him how to hold his ground without losing his composure. Later in the afternoon, Signora Bellini appeared on the terrace. She was dressed less formally now, a tailored cream jacket over a soft blouse, but her posture remained regal. The light in her eyes was still sharp, though not hostile. Rather, it carried the weight of a reluctant acknowledgement. She stopped at his table, resting her hand lightly on the back of the empty chair opposite him. "May I?" Malik gestured for her to sit. For a moment, they said nothing, the muted sound of the city below filling the space between them. Then, Bellini spoke, her voice measured. "You have left an impression on my staff. And on me." Malik regarded her steadily. "I wasn't looking for an impression. I was looking for respect." She inclined her head slightly. "I understand that now. And perhaps I needed the reminder." There was something almost human in her tone now, a softening of the steel. "Hospitality is an art," she continued, "but it is also a discipline. It is easy to become complacent when the walls are gilded and the name is famous. Malik allowed a small smile. Complacency is the slowest form of decline. For the first time, Bellini's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. They spoke for a while longer, not about the firing, not about the confrontation, but about Florence, the rhythms of Italian life, the changing face of global travel. When she rose to leave, she extended her hand. Malik shook it firmly, their eyes meeting in a quiet accord. She walked away with her poise intact, but Malik could sense that something fundamental had shifted in her perspective. That evening, the Magnifico's dining hall was subtly transformed. The lighting was warmer, the service sharper, and the air carried an almost celebratory undercurrent. Malik dined alone at a table by the window, the view of the softly lit Ponte Vecchio arching over the river like a scene from a painting. Course after course arrived hand-rolled pasta with truffle, fresh sea bass with fennel and lemon, a perfectly balanced Chianti poured with reverence by the sommelier. Each dish was a statement, not just of culinary skill but of restored pride. At one point, Malik caught the eye of the young server from earlier, who gave a discreet nod of acknowledgement, as though silently thanking him for raising the standard for everyone. By the time dessert arrived, a dark chocolate torta with mascarpone cream the city outside had quieted, the glow of the street lamps mirrored in the Arno's slow current. Malik lingered over his final sip of wine, letting the richness settle. He thought about the staff who were gone, about those who remained, and about how change, though uncomfortable, was sometimes the only way forward. Power, he knew, was not just in the ability to act, but in the discipline to act with purpose. When he finally stood to leave, the Mater D escorted him to the door personally, offering a formal goodnight. Malik stepped into the cool Florence night, the air fragrant with distant jasmine and the faint trace of rain on stone. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of a scooter or the murmur of late-night walkers. As he strolled back toward his suite, Malik glanced once more at the glowing facade of the Magnifico. It stood there, beautiful and imposing as ever, but now with the subtle mark of his presence embedded in its story. Tomorrow he would leave Florence, carrying with him not just memories of art and architecture, but the satisfaction of having turned a moment of disregard into a lasting statement. In a city defined by its history, Malik had carved his own small chapter, not in marble or paint, but in the living standard of a place that would remember him long after his departure. The morning of Malik's departure arrived bathed in soft Tuscan sunlight. From his sweet balcony, he watched Florence awaken vendors arranging fruit at the market, church bells echoing across terracotta rooftops, and the Arno glistening under a cloudless sky. His luggage stood ready, but he lingered over a final espresso, savoring the stillness. When he finally descended to the lobby, the staff greeted him with polished warmth, the kind that came from genuine respect rather than forced courtesy. Even Giancarlo, still in his post, gave a quiet nod of acknowledgement. As Malik stepped into his waiting car, he glanced back at the Magnifico Hotel. It stood regal, unchanged in architecture, yet subtly transformed in spirit. He knew his visit would be remembered not as a scandal, but as a turning point. Power had its place, but dignity had its legacy. With the city receding in the rearview mirror, Malik allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile. That was the story of how a black CEO, denied simple room service in Florence, turned a moment of disrespect into a decisive change that reshaped an entire hotel. If you enjoyed this story of dignity, power, and transformation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives. See you in the next story.